I am so excited to be here with my dearest friend, Noe
Mm.
Venable. We've known each other for, I guess, 14 years, right?
Yeah, 14.
We met at childbirth education class.
Hmm.
And yeah, and we experienced the first couple of years of motherhood together. And then Noe moved from the East Coast to the West Coast back to where she's from to raise her children. And just, we when Noe was here in Brooklyn, she led this beautiful child centered group, Waldorf inspired play group that made such a difference, I think, on so many people's lives in those early mothering years where it was really tender and challenging and lonely, and it just brought a lot of joy and peace to my life, and I'm sure I know other people's lives. And that was, I know you created something similar when you moved out west. So Noe is like, I'm talking to you but talking about you. Noe is an incredible leader, song leader, um, child leader, um, mother leader, and spiritual counselor and therapist and musician, and just incredibly creative spirit with such a deep well of wisdom and knowledge and connection to the great mother.
Mm.
Yeah. And I feel like there's so many questions, of course. The first question I usually ask here is, what does intuition mean to you?
I love that question and I want to answer it, but I want to start. I just want to respond first to just your beautiful intro, Liz, and just say it's so special to be here with you, my dearly beloved friend, and to just share one little moment from my night last night because I was with my children and we were playing the Hygge game where you read different questions and ask them to one another as a way of just starting sweet conversation with your kiddos. And there was a question. It was, what is your happiest memory? And I was thinking about it and I was remembering the moments of you and I sitting under that tree. Was it a cherry tree? I think it was a cherry tree,
Yeah,
right?
cherry
In the
tree.
nature playground. And I remember sitting there with you and the cherry blossoms wafting down around us and our children playing about our feet and just the feeling of it being a perfect moment, just a moment of such connection and sweetness and a sense of being held and being safe and being with our babes. And yeah, that's what I shared with my children as my happiest moment that I could remember.
Hmm.
Uh,
That's so touching.
mm,
I remember it like it was yesterday. That
yeah.
that cherry tree has always felt so magical to me, especially when it's blooming and especially when the petals start to fall. And the
Mhm.
times that we had in that, the nature playground in Prospect Park, it was, yeah, it's just so essential.
Yeah,
And I do have such beautiful memories of that time, and yeah, of spending time with you. And
yeah.
yeah.
Let's say hello to her for me, that tree.
I will.
And to connect this back to your question around intuition, I'm thinking it's so interesting about where we met and when we met at our lives, at that point in our lives, because when I think about it, back then, my relationship to intuition was that I would sometimes have the sense of something wanting to be born, and sometimes I would open my system such that it would feel like it could be born through me. So, whether that was a song or a poem or even an impulse in the world, like impulses, an impulse for mamas to come together with our babes in the park. It felt like something that I would channel, but I didn't really have too much of a sense of how it happened. And I didn't have a whole lot of discernment around how it happened. So sometimes big things would come through and then I would feel a little like I'd bitten off more than I could chew. Like how can I hold the energy of this? Um, that would happen to me with starting things in the world, that if it's a really good idea that comes through, there can be more and more and more people involved, and it can expand to a point where it becomes a little too much, for you to hold unless you've really got the structures in place. So, my story for a long time was one of dealing with like rapid expansion of things that would happen kind of feeling seemingly beyond my bandwidth. And so this is one of the ways that intuition, I think, can look, is like this unbridled sort of channeling of energy that manifests things in the world or helps us align with a sense of purpose. But my journey around understanding how to be in right relationship with intuition has involved really learning how to cultivate and tend the channel through which inspiration comes in such a way that it is within my bandwidth, the kinds of things that I'm working with and holding. So I guess when I think of intuition, I think intuition is like the potential to be able to receive information, input, energy, but then the tending of intuition is about creating the kind of structure that can allow you to work safely and discerningly with that power that can come through. Yeah.
That's one of the best definitions of intuition, or at least not necessarily definitions, but explanations of the responsible use of intuition and the
Yeah.
responsible embodiment of it. And it's so much was coming up for me as you were speaking, because I know you so well and we've spoken almost daily for 14 years, something like that, sometimes every other day but so I've seen, this honing of intuition in you over all this time. So I'm like getting flashes of our conversations over so many years, and um yeah, it's really potent because I could feel the way in which you hold it now in a really, I keep thinking responsible way, but that's like what it feels like because it has structure to it. It's not, intuition. People say, oh, follow your intuition, but, the discernment isn't always there. You could follow one voice and, it leads you maybe somewhere you didn't think you wanted to be. Anyway, it's making me also think about, um, listening to voices from different parts of ourselves and your work as an IFS practitioner. And
Yeah.
would love to hear how that works with intuition.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking it's interesting. There's sort of a few different pieces here. One is around opening the channel for intuition to flow through. And I want to just come back to one thing that you said a moment ago because it was so interesting. You were sharing, you said, people say, like, follow your intuition. And a lot of us need to be told, follow your intuition, go with your intuition, because these capacities are so suppressed in us and in our culture. They're so undervalued. So I think a lot of us, we need encouragement to be able to let it through, like to let through what wants to come through us. But we all have different relationships to it. Like for some people, some times of our life, we may have sort of less access to it. So it can be about encouraging a person, like, yeah, trust it, like open it, let it through. But then some folks can deal with like great rushes of intuition that come through that are so much that it's sort of about learning how to hone and refine that container. So I'm thinking about it almost as like a kind of a raw energy, like a chi, like it's just spirit power that runs through. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I didn't realize you asked a question about parts, but I had
No,
to
it's
circle
okay.
back to
I
that for a
I
moment.
appreciate that stepping back. I tend to jump really far ahead, and I feel this yeah, just sense of being with that and letting that kind of settle because it feels like just really important information for people to hear
Mhm.
about the channel and yeah, how to work with it. I'm watching a
Yeah.
bee fly, some bees flying, bees flying out the window.
Oh, hello, bees.
Hello, bees.
Yeah, it's like I'm thinking about it. There's sort of two different things. There's the flow, like the energy that is intuition or that, like that power that we connect to. And then there's the channel that it flows through. There's the pipeline is the channel, and then there's like the energy itself. And so one thing is about how much are we accessing that energy and what's that energy like and how is it affecting us and how does it flow in us. And then the other is about like refining ourselves and our inner system, to be able to flow that in safe and healthy ways.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I guess the questioner on IFS is like feeling into that refinement, that it does take time and practice, and it's
Yeah.
not something that just comes overnight. Um, Intuition flows when we are open, but then the practice is what, is essential. And I guess, in thinking about your own development over the years, like I know you, like all that you've um different trainings that you've done and things that you've experienced too, I would say like as the philosophy that I study is like tune your instrument. You're
Mhm.
tuning literally. I see the harp behind you too. As a musician, you're tuning this instrument so that the intuition is channeled in a wise way. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Which really does then bring us to thinking about the inner system and parts of ourselves being one important aspect of that inner system, which kind of brings us around, to your question about IFS. And um, yeah, it makes me think about like the way that I've come to understand the psyche and the way that energy flows in us. On the one hand, there's our relationship to energy itself, to the life force. And in IFS, we have a term, we've talked about this together, the idea of self energy as being a way to describe that life force that flows through us. And like, just come back to intuition for a second. I would say as I kind of refine it's not something I've ever really thought to define, but really, what I'm thinking is intuition arises when we're in right relationship to spirit within us, to the life force. And in IFS, we call that sense of spirit within us, as I've said, self energy. And it has a number of characteristics: creativity, calm, curiosity, compassion, connection, confidence, clarity, courage. I think I named all the C's. And I'm referring, of course, to internal family systems therapy as developed by Dick Schwartz, which is one of the modalities that I work with in my practice, and it's been very supportive for my personal growth. Um, so there's self energy, or spirit within us, and then in terms of our what then in terms of our ability to like flow that through our systems, there's a lot that can get in the way of that. And one of the things that can potentially get in the way is the different parts of us who have strategic protective agendas and who like to, take the wheel of our bus and be driving the car. Like, so for example, whenever we're possessed with like a feeling, that feels like uncomfortable or hard, or we find ourselves like driving a particular agenda, we're always blended, we would say in IFS, with a part that's in the lead there. And we have less access in that moment to those beautiful capacities of the spaciousness of self energy. So, what IFS has helped me to do, and the work that I do with clients, is around helping people to build relationships with these parts of themselves that then allow those parts in time to be able to kind of soften back and feel held and loved and supported by this, that which lies beyond the parts, which is our self energy, which is spirit within us, essentially.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing those details. It makes me um also want to like go into how you practice it as opposed like internal family systems has it's a very particular set of skills, but then there are other ways of utilizing it. And I understand that the way that you work with IFS might be different from somebody else. So like there's probably a shamanic lens on the way. I mean, IFS, I think naturally is a shamanic system
Mhm.
um, that's been, um, modernized. But how do you work with IFS that might be different from, somebody else?
Yeah. That's a really great question because it is a very vast model and it can be applied in a lot of different ways. I feel like I should first just say that for me, IFS is one modality that I use in service of kind of a deeper sense of purpose in the world, which is really around working with the healing frequency of the Great Mother. It's around working with that energy. And all the work that I do, whether it's with clients or whether it's in the therapeutic singing groups that I lead, even to some extent as a singer songwriter, this is always the field of energy that I'm working with, is the energy of the Great Mother. And what I love about IFS is that it helps us to come into right relationship with the parts of ourselves and to really tend and to care for those ones. And so this is a way that this healing frequency of this great mother energy can be brought into a capacity to heal our own systems. And my way with this and all the work that I do is all about moving away from um, an over dominance of the left brain and to reintegrate and value and honor and draw upon right brained ways of knowing and being. And, to kind of contrast the two, and I should just say first, it used to be that we thought left brain did these things and right brain did these things, and there was a real kind of bifurcated division in the tasks that the parts of the brain were responsible for. We now know it's a lot more complex, that there's a lot more sharing of responsibilities between the brain hemispheres, that they really work together in a cooperative kind of a way. But there still are these characteristics that are more connected with one side than the other. So the left brain is responsible more for things related to goals and tasks, anything that's directional, goal oriented, things that are about categorizing, like when you try to understand something, taking something out of context and thinking that's the way to understand it is to isolate it. The right brain, by contrast, is all about relational attunement, about seeing things in context, like in a natural system where you can't, according to the right brain, according to the left brain, like the way to understand something important about that system, if you want to understand a bird, like you would take the bird out and you would study it you'd put it in a cage and you'd try to isolate it and understand it. with the right brain, we understand that the bird cannot really be understood outside of its natural context, outside of that system. So the right brain always sees things in context. So you know, this when I talk about the healing field of the great mother and kind of this energy of relational attunement, of care, of embodiment, of the felt sense, these are all capacities that I really identify with the right brain. And if you look at our society, I know we've talked so much about this, about the what some people have called the left shiftedness of our society, that we live in a culture that's really, led by where these left brain kind of ways dominate. And so I try to practice everything that I do in a way that centers right brain ways of knowing, and uplifts those. So it's all about embodiment and about the felt sense and about turning gently inward with curiosity and a lot of allowing the bottom up processing of the body and the felt sense to guide and lead and help us to, realign in a way where ultimately the two are in balance.
Mm, awesome. There's so many things coming up around in some traditions, one side of the body is the feminine and one represents the masculine, and not to gender necessarily the left and right brain, but there is sort of this also overlay of the patriarchal, matriarchal. You're saying the great mother is the embodiment and more of the like contextual, holistic, um, again, not to say one is better than the other. We do need rationality and we do need to kind of look at things closely and maybe out of context to understand and then bring it back into context. So it's not one or the other. It's like the blending and the integration of these two hemispheres. And that's not even all. Like, of course, like the two hemispheres, and then there's like, the hippocampus and the, subcortical, and then the spine, and there's all kinds of other, aspects to this, but I really appreciate the lens of, kind of moving us into, from one brain to the other, one side of the brain to the other, and then also the integration of the whole self. Um, recently I learned a practice in the healing modality that I'm studying called brain balancing, where we do just what you're describing. We bring attention to the brain and we move the energy out of, we move it back into balance. So we're moving it from the left. Generally, what I've found for myself and for other people is that the left side is fine. It's overdeveloped, And what we do need to do is bring the attention to the right, bring it into the pituitary gland, what people call the third eye, bringing the awareness into the whole brain, into the whole body, so that we can move through the world in balance, in right relationship. So I really
Oh, I
appreciate.
love that. Yeah. That makes so much sense. Yeah. Yeah, and it makes me think about how it's interesting how, of course, when we talk about this, we are kind of categorizing the brain. We are dividing it and looking at these different sections. And I think why that's so important is because of this dominant narrative, that we all have been acculturated to in this culture that does so prioritize left brain ways of being and knowing, that I love the way recognizing these differences can help us to really shine a light on what's been missing and why it's so important and how it can be reclaimed and recentered and reintegrated in a language that allows us to help make these things visible in the dominant discourse of how we generally talk about these things. So I think it's very helpful and empowering, to bring the neurobiological lens in here too, alongside that spiritual one.
Yeah. And I'm feeling also just into like naming some of the things that have been a result of sort of the more left dominant culture. Just thinking about like the extractive economy and how, that it takes things out of sort of an ecosystem view and just zeroes in on, say, like one resource and extracts that, as opposed to let's look at the whole system and what happens when we do that. What happens, I'm thinking about the wolves in Yellowstone, and how when the wolves were taken away, what happened to the ecosystem. We needed that, you know, top of the food chain predator in order for there to be balance in the system. When we remove that, things really just went awry. And then, there's the macrocosm and the microcosm. So, like, what happens to us when what happens when we are so on one side? What happens to our spirit? What happens to our lives when we're separated from the rest of ourselves?
Those are such great examples you give ecologically for what that's like. And taking that to then thinking about the internal experience, it makes me think about what I see with a lot of clients because I work with a lot of folks who are often guides or coaches or therapists themselves. And something that I've seen with so many of the people I work with, especially women, is that we all carry to some extent these wounds around this imposter syndrome feeling of we're we're not enough. We need to learn more, be more, do more. We need to have another training. We need to have another degree, another program. And this just drives us. And meanwhile, here we are with this incredible wealth and depth of spirit and this incredible capacity for love and care and relational attunement, all of these qualities that you don't learn in a degree program, that you don't learn through a training. It's there, it's innate, and it's just blossoming in spades in the folks that I work with. And so just seeing the way that left brain overlay causes people to bring a critical lens that actually can blind us to really what's just there and blossoming and powerful, and what is in fact like our true, probably our deepest gifts lie in that shadow area that the left brain overlay can't actually really see.
Yeah.
So the power of work around opening these channels to intuition, whether it's parts work or other forms of work to do that, is that we can begin to help people to go down into that shadow place and put our roots down there and drink really deep and feel and find the power of that place that allows us to then lead, to center and reclaim and lead from the felt sense. And then what does it look like to come from there and then like have the left brain stuff be in right relationship there, where it's not in control of everything, but it's in relationship to this deep rootedness in our own inner knowing in relationship.
Mm. That feels really good.
Mm.
And it is something I want to acknowledge too, is that, that there's something about that conditioning, that overlay, that makes it hard for people to access the whole self. And it's really, the struggle is real, and people are living it every day, including myself, how to balance living in this world that is capitalistic and where we have to feed ourselves and work and, maybe be mothers or parents while still working really hard at a job that's maybe not fulfilling. And make so that we can take care of basic survival needs. And I think there's also another piece around survival here, that might want to come through because, you know, I feel like there's ways that we have to survive in that left brain in this world. So how can we, you know, slowly make our way? And then what are like the implications of that when we actually can move into those other places? Like, you know, could we then see the possibilities of doing something different?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I think this is so important and it resonates very deeply for me. I think about, for one thing, my own journey around learning how to make a life in this world that's sustainable, in with right livelihood, a right aligned way with what matters to me, serving what matters. The challenge of actually doing that in a world which prioritizes things that may be so misaligned for some of us, but also thinking of it with regards to, again, many clients that I work with who are wrestling with this same kind of issue of how do I live in this world as it is when it seems like sometimes what's asked of me in terms of the systems that I'm required to participate in just feels like it's anathema to parts of me. Like parts of me want to crawl into bed, pull the covers over my head, and just hide there. Or parts just carry this immense grief around the state of the world. Or parts of me are body on the line, fighting for the things that I believe, showing up where I can help, and trying to interrupt the system in all the ways that we can. And what I notice here as I think about this is I just feel into all the parts that activate in us in response to participating in this system and living in this world, and how much those parts are carrying, how hard it is for them, how hard they're working, how deep their burdens and their grief and their sorrows and their pain. Which brings me to, that this is why, to me, one of the deepest and most important aspects of healing in the world, and I'll just speak for my own like calling here around the field of the Great Mother and this healing frequency, is learning how to be there for those parts of ourselves with what this is like for them, and to be that calm in the storm presence who's able to listen to what they feel and experience, and to be able to provide the kind of reassurance that's not ever a minimizing of those feelings, but is more like, whatever happens here, you're not alone. We're in this together. We'll find our way together, and you don't have to do this alone, is sometimes the comfort that those parts need, and that we can feel from another person who is holding that kind of a loving, grounded field, and that we also can come to feel within our system as parts come to trust in this, the trust in ourself.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really important aspect of this is that, you know, there could be a misconception that you want to get rid of a part, but you're not doing that. You're listening because each part has gotten you to this point. Each part has played their role in keeping you alive, and the acknowledgement, the listening, and then the thanking, you know, thank you for telling me this. You know, this is really important to hear, you know, acknowledging, listening, working together. It's like coordinating a group within the self.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when you say that, I'm thinking also how, with regards to parts or with the nervous system, which is another layer of what's happening in our system that's so important to be able to attune to and notice, like, what's my nervous system state right now. It can be a really powerful practice. I'm just thinking how so much of the capacity to heal really begins simply with just being able to notice what's here right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And instead of trying to turn from it or run away or suppress it, to actually turn towards it
Yeah.
and just get curious, like, what's here
Yeah.
now?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the tendency is to dismiss, try to block, it's inconvenient for it
Mhm.
sometimes to be facing these parts of self or um and so yeah, I think it's a really important, I would say reminder, but it's an important aspect of this is that presence in the here now. What is actually here now? Let me look at it. Let me be curious. It's those C's you were talking about too. And I think curiosity to me is like one of the essential traits to embody when you're coming into these feelings, what's present with me right now. Oh, let me ask some questions. As soon as we stop asking questions, then that's kind of like when things get a little stuck. Maybe, there's the nervous system responses, freeze and fight and flight and fawn. And I think that those come on when we are trying to avoid what's really here now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And it makes me think too about different types of questions. There are the types of questions that our intellect asks, the types of questions that are about trying to understand, kind of pin it down or categorize it, like the left brain kinds of questions. And then there's also this kind of right brain, like the attunement question, which is most fundamentally just kind of what's here? What's here right now? So noticing like how differently curiosity can be expressed, and the power of a curiosity that is that's pointed towards deepening connection and attunement versus trying to understand.
Mm, I love that nuance. That's such an important nuance.
Yeah.
There's like the why, what, and how are kind of the three kind of leading parts of a question. And asking, I learned this from one of my teachers, is like, what's wrong? That question will, you can fill pages with what's wrong, but what's needed? Maybe that's a question to ask. What's, like you said, or what's
Mm.
here now?
Yeah.
What is needed now?
Mm. Yeah. I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah. That's
Mm.
been an important one for me lately, is like not jumping ahead and just saying, okay, what is actually needed? It's like you were saying before, the parts that have an agenda or trying to push or force. And I feel like there's also this other aspect of the somatic experience of when you're in a part, noticing when you are trying to push something, force something, like that's likely a part that has an agenda. So instead of like, just take a moment. Hey, what do you really need here? What are you trying to what are you trying to do?
Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah.
And like that kind of curiosity versus like, like you said, kind of like the concrete, like what, trying to understand.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think as you're saying that, it's making me think also how subversive that type of attention really is in our culture. The real getting curious, the real slowing down and getting curious about what's here. For a lot of us, this is a very new capacity to develop. Because for a lot of us, we weren't necessarily raised in families where this way of being together was really centered.
Yeah.
Um, you know, it's interesting thinking about something that I found helpful because a lot of my work with clients is around supporting people in developing this capacity for attunement to their own inner system and to others. And it's interesting developing a capacity that we may not actually have had a lot of experience of being on the receiving end of, or that we've experienced only in maybe glimpses.
Mm.
But sometimes there are these moments that we can think back on in our lives and remember moments where we felt really seen
Mm.
and cared for by another person. And I can share, thinking there are a couple of special moments that stand out to me when I think about like what that feeling is, and I want to feel that feeling before I had a lot of access to that in my own system. I've cultivated that over a lot of inner work. But some of the places where I felt it really strongly from another person, there was this teacher I had. Have I ever told you about her? My kindergarten teacher?
I don't know.
Oh my gosh, can there really be something that I haven't told you
It's
over all
possible
these
you
weeks?
have, and I just don't remember, but I want to hear
It's possible. It's exciting. Um,
it.
So there was this teacher I had. Her name was Odette Henderson. And when I was very young, the interesting thing is I don't actually remember my time in class with her. I by process of elimination around kind of who was at the school and what roles they were in, I think she must have been my kindergarten teacher, but I can't actually remember, and my mother can't remember either. What I do remember is that this woman made such an impression on me. I remember that I would see her, my memories are of seeing her in the hall, and she was this beautiful African American statuesque woman. And I remember that she would look at me and she would smile, and that the smile was like the feeling of sun just raining onto the leaves of a plant. Like I would just like turn towards her like like a flower turning towards the sun. And my memory is of her just these little fleeting moments of her maybe taking a moment in the hall after I was in class with her when she wasn't my teacher anymore, but just taking this one little extra moment to
Mm.
just say hello, and what it felt like to be on the receiving end of that
Mm.
radiant love, which of course was not specific to me, but it was the kind of love that when it's focused on you makes you feel like the only person in the world in that moment. You just are really soaking in that love. And um, this teacher, I won't go too much down the rabbit hole of this story, but she actually died shortly after that. She died when I was in, I think, second grade, which is part of why I think I can't quite remember there's a lot that I don't remember about this time of my life, but I do remember these moments with her. And I feel as though now, when I think about what it is that curious, loving turning towards, that invites someone to be present with all of their parts, with everything that's there, and to just kind of open and become vulnerable in the ways that allow growth to happen and healing to happen. It's this safety that I remember feeling like in the love and care of her gaze. Yeah.
Thank you, Odette. That's so
Yeah, Odette.
wow. Wow.
Which makes me curious, just thinking about it. And as I share about this, I feel this like kind of lightness and joy in my system, and this sense of gratitude, uh, I'm savoring like that felt experience of what it is to feel that love with a person, you know. And it makes me curious about you too, about like, are there early experiences or experiences in your life that you remember of feeling really seen by another person?
Thank you for turning it to me. Um, mm, I just want to say, like, the simplicity. I just want to acknowledge the simplicity of that, her presence, her smile, her gaze. That is so simple, but it holds so much meaning and it's influenced you in such a big way.
Mhm.
I thought of a teacher, and I don't know if I felt necessarily seen by her, but I felt this teacher I think I had in the fifth grade. I can't remember her name, but she had no uvula. She would show the students that she had, the uvula that hangs down in your throat. She didn't have one. And it was the strangest thing that she would show everybody that she had no uvula. And I don't know what it was about that, but to me, that felt like it's what you're saying about vulnerability, like it felt like this. She was showing everyone how strange it was that she had no uvula, and like she was accepting of that like strange quirk of herself. And I think, that came to mind just because there is something vulnerable in that, like, look at this weird thing about me. Let me show you. And it could be construed in so many strange ways, but like to me, that felt like such a gift to show children this, quirk.
Wow, that's really interesting. Like, as I hear that, I'm thinking it sounds so intimate, like the sharing of that thing about your body. And I'm I'm thinking about that moment really standing out to you, it being something you remember here, and how this really sounds like a moment of kind of stepping outside of the matrix of a lot of what we expect like teacher child relations to be like. There's something very unusual that opened there in that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really
There's
interesting.
so many, yeah, there's so many ways to like I feel like I'm going into, it's her throat and like, yeah, it's very intimate. It's like, but it's also like safe too,
Yeah.
It's safe and comforting, strangely.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and feeling her sharing this vulnerable thing with you. Yeah, there was something really connective in that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so
Yeah.
sweet.